Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In a quiet Midwestern town, the seasons passed by to the rhythm of elementary school bells, Saturday baseball games, and Sunday morning services. The streets lined with identical houses seemed to bear a single motto, compliance, but behind the impeccable facades and the conventional smiles, invisible barriers still remained, inherited from a past that some refused to leave behind. It was in this setting that two children, whom everything seemed to separate, were going to meet. Emily Parker, 8 years old, came from a white, middle-class family. Her mother, a schoolteacher, often told her that good behavior was the key to success. Her father, an accountant, believed in order, respect, and tradition. Emily was a quiet little girl, her bright eyes always lost in books, searching for worlds where justice always triumphed. David Johnson, he lived just a few streets away, but in a different reality. His parents worked hard, his father in a factory, his mother as a nurse. They didn't own much, but their home echoed with laughter, gospel music on Sundays, and unconditional love. David, with his infectious smile and bright eyes, possessed an energy that nothing seemed to be able to extinguish. Their two worlds were never meant to intersect. In a city still marked by deep-rooted prejudices, friendships like theirs were rarely accepted. Yet one autumn morning, in the courtyard of the primary school in Lincoln Elementary, their paths met. A simple look. A clumsy smile. An innocent gesture. Nothing more. But it was enough for something to be born, fragile and luminous. Emily and David were just children. They didn't yet know that the weight of the world would try to tear them apart, that voices would be raised to remind them of their differences. They also didn't know that, behind these obstacles, lurked a bond stronger than fear, stronger than hatred. What they didn't yet know was that their story, which began by chance in a schoolyard, would become a struggle, a hope, and perhaps proof that destiny is often played out in the smallest moments. The autumn sun was slowly rising over the small town of Springfield, Illinois. The air had that crisp September freshness, announcing the end of the holidays and the return to the noisy school corridors. The yellow buses stopped one after the other in front of the red brick building of Lincoln Elementary School, pouring out a tide of overexcited children, new school bags on their backs and still immaculate sneakers. In the midst of this turmoil, Emily Parker, she walked cautiously. Her small hand clutched the strap of her purple backpack, decorated with stickers she had affixed herself. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a perfect braid, carefully styled by her mother before leaving. Emily always had that uncomfortable feeling on the first day, the impression of entering a world where everyone already knew each other, except for her. She crossed the courtyard, her eyes lowered, avoiding the already formed groups. Her heart was beating fast. What if no one wants to sit next to her? What if she stays alone? Hey, attention! Emily looked up just in time to see a soccer ball rolling toward her. She flinched, but a figure appeared and stopped the ball with his foot with effortless ease. It was a boy, tall for his age, dark-skinned, his eyes sparkling with a playful mischief. He retrieved the ball, then turned to her. "Sorry, he almost ran into you," he said with a genuine smile. "Oh, it's okay," Emily murmured, surprised at his kindness. He stayed for a second, as if to make sure she was okay, then ran off toward his friends. Emily followed him with her eyes. She didn't know his name, but she felt a strange warmth in her chest. The first time in a long time, someone had spoken to her without judging her. A few minutes later, the bell rang. The students lined up in their classes. Emily timidly followed the stream of children to the classroom, Madam Green, their third-grade teacher. The room smelled of chalk and new pencils. The desks were arranged in rows of two. Emily moved nervously, looking for a seat. Most of the seats were already occupied by pairs who knew each other. In the last row, an empty seat next to a boy caught her eye. It was him. The balloon boy. He looked up and waved at her. "Do you want to sit here?" he asked naturally. Emily hesitated for a split second, then nodded shyly. She settled down, placing her bag on her lap. "Me, it is David. David Johnson." And you? Emily. Emily Parker. Pleased to meet you, Emily Parker, he said with a theatrical seriousness that made her smile in spite of herself. The bell rang, and Mrs. Green began taking the roll. Emily, intent on the teacher's voice, didn't even realize her fingers were nervously playing with the zipper of her bag. David, however, watched her out of the corner of his eye. She looked so fragile, but something in her eyes betrayed a strength he couldn't quite place. The day passed with its usual rituals, introductions, new notebooks, first exercises. But for Emily, one thing was already certain: she was no longer alone. At afternoon recess, sitting on the bench near the old oak tree in the courtyard, she saw David approaching, 2 apples in his hands. "Do you want one?" he asked simply. "Oh, yes, thank you," she replied, a little surprised. He bit into his with energy. "You know, people here like to stay with their lifelong friends. But if you want, I can be your friend." Emily's eyes widened. No one had ever offered her friendship in such a direct way. A shy smile lit up her face. "Okay, buddy." At that simple and innocent moment, no one noticed the invisible promise that had just been sealed. Emily and David didn't know it yet, but this small, childish pact would mark the beginning of a story much bigger than themselves. The next morning, Emily woke up with a knot in her stomach. Her mother had called her 3 times before she finally got out of bed. She didn't particularly like school, but something had changed since the day before. She was no longer completely alone. This thought reassured her, even if she didn't dare admit it to herself yet. In the kitchen, his father was already reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You have to make a good impression, Emily. Never forget that the Parkers must be respected," he said without looking up from his pages. Emily nodded, not answering. She reached for her bag, where her mother had slipped a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a small apple juice. At school, the morning passed more quickly than the day before. Emily was less afraid. Sitting next to David made her strangely more confident. He was talkative, always with a funny word to lighten the mood, and she listened to him, fascinated. When the bell rang to announce lunchtime, the children rushed to the cafeteria or took their lunchboxes out into the courtyard. Emily, a little distracted, rummaged through her bag and blanched. Her sandwich wasn't there. Perhaps she'd left it on the kitchen table. She felt her cheeks heat. "Great, now everyone's going to look at me like I'm weird." Sitting on a bench, she lowered her head to hide her wet eyes. But then a familiar voice rang out. "Hey, Emily. Don't you have anything to eat?" She looked up and saw David, his plastic bag in hand. Inside, a ham sandwich, a bag of chips, and a shiny red apple. "I forgot my sandwich," she murmured. "No problem. Here, take this." He handed her the apple. Emily hesitated. "But, and you?" "I always have 2. My mother says I eat like an ogre, so she gives me extra," he replied, laughing. Emily timidly took the apple. "Thank you, David." "You're welcome. Friends share." They ate together, sitting under the shade of a large maple tree. David told her he loved playing football with his cousins on weekends, that he adored superhero cartoons, and that he dreamed of one day becoming a professional football player. Emily, for her part, confided in him that she loved reading fairy tales, drawing princesses, and that she dreamed of traveling to faraway countries, far from Springfield. Their laughter mingled, innocent, pure. But around them, a few glances were already fixed insistently. 2 boys, sitting nearby, whispered to each other. "Look, Parker is hanging out with Johnson." "Seriously? A white girl with him? That's weird." Emily didn't hear them. But David did. His smile faded for a moment, before he deliberately revived it so as not to spoil the moment. He was already familiar with these whispers. He had learned to ignore them. But this time, he wasn't alone. "Say, Emily," he began. "Yes? No matter what anyone says, we'll still be friends, okay?" She frowned in surprise. Of course, why do you say that? Oh, nothing, just a promise, he replied with a shrug. Emily smiled. She didn't understand everything, not yet. But she felt that this friendship meant more than she imagined. That day, under the maple tree, a shared apple sealed something precious. Neither of them could yet measure the extent to which this simple gesture would weigh on their future. As the weeks passed, autumn enveloped Springfield in its orange colors. Lincoln Elementary, the dead leaves crunched under the feet of the children running in the playground. Emily and David, inseparable, had developed a routine. They sat under the maple tree during each break, shared their snacks, laughed at their invented jokes, and dreamed aloud about what they would do when they grew up. For them, this connection was natural. For others, it became strange. One morning, while they were playing a guessing game, a small group of students approached. At their head was Mark Simmons, a haughty-looking blond boy, known for his mockery. "Hey, Emily," he called, a smirk on his lips. Emily raised her head, suspicious. "What? Why do you always hang out with him?" he said, pointing at David with his chin. David stiffened. Emily blinked in confusion. "Because, he's my friend." Mark burst out laughing, followed by two other boys behind him. "Your friend? Seriously? You could be friends with girls in your class, not with him." Silence fell. Emily felt a growing embarrassment, unsure why he was so insistent. "So what? What difference does it make?" she asked, her voice trembling a little. Mark snickered. "Everyone thinks it's weird. A girl like you with a boy like him." Emily still didn't understand what weird meant when he said it. But David was used to it. His fists clenched discreetly. He stared straight into Mark's eyes, not responding. Emily, seeing the discomfort, jumped up. "You know what, Mark? I choose my friends. And if you don't like it, tough luck." She took David's hand and walked away, her heart pounding. The whispers behind them continued, whispers she couldn't make out. But David heard. "A white woman and a black man, it won't last. His parents will forbid him, that's for sure." He looked down to keep his anger from showing. Emily was still gripping his hand, tighter than she expected. Under the maple tree, she finally let out a sigh. "Why does he say things like that? We didn't do anything wrong." David shrugged, his smile a little sad. "People, they like to put up barriers. But you don't care, do you?" Emily stared at him, her blue eyes full of innocence. "Of course I don't care. You're my friend. And no one will tell me otherwise." David looked at her for a moment, impressed by her determination. He nodded, then whispered. "Then that suits me." That day, their friendship was tested for the first time. And even though Emily didn't yet understand the full extent of the teasing, David knew it was just a taste of what the future held for them. The children, in their naivety, believed that school was their entire world. But very quickly, what was happening under the maple tree in the courtyard ended up crossing the walls of Lincoln Elementary and invite himself into the Parker and Johnson houses. At the Parkers. One Friday evening, around the family table, Emily was telling her parents about her week. Her father, Richard Parker, was reading his newspaper as usual, while his mother, Susan Parker, served roast chicken and vegetables. "And David lent me his pencil when I lost mine," Emily said enthusiastically. "He's really nice, Mom." A heavy silence fell. Richard slowly lowered his newspaper. "David?" he asked in a cold voice. "Yes. David Johnson. He's in my class." "We're friends," she replied without suspicion. Richard's gaze darkened. "Emily, you have to choose your company carefully." "But, Dad, he's just a friend." "Exactly. You're a Parker. And Parkers have to maintain a certain reputation." Susan put down her fork, uncomfortably. "Richard, they are children." "No, Susan. Even as a child, you learn where the limits are." Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't understand. Her father didn't even know David. Why was he talking as if being her friend was a mistake? But he's nice. She protested weakly. That's not the point, Richard said. I don't want you spending your time with him. The little girl looked down, her heart heavy. At the Johnsons'. Across town, the mood was quite different. In the Johnsons' modest but cozy home, David munched on cookies while his mother, Angela Johnson, was preparing dinner. His father, Michael Johnson, had just returned from the factory, his hands still covered in metal dust. "Dad!" David exclaimed happily. "Today I got a 10 in reading. Emily helped me revise." Michael smiled proudly. "Emily? Is she a new classmate?" "Yes. She's great. We play together all the time." Angela looked up from her pan, intrigued. "That's good, my dear. And what is she like, this Emily?" "She's different," David replied with a dreamy smile. "She defends me when others make fun of me. And she says we'll always be friends." A knowing look passed between Angela and Michael. "As long as it brings you joy, son, that's fine with me," Michael said. "But remember," Angela added in a soft but firm voice, "not everyone will understand your friendship with her. Some people still see barriers where there aren't any." David nodded. He already knew. But hearing his mother confirm it pressed a bitter truth on his child's heart. So, while the Parker household worried about reputation and propriety, the Johnson household encouraged their son while warning him of the harsh reality. Emily and David, in their innocence, were still unaware of the magnitude of what was happening around them. But the shadow of the adults was already beginning to fall over their friendship, discreet but threatening, like a black cloud over a still clear sky. Autumn was drawing to a close. The days were getting shorter, dead leaves carpeted the schoolyard, and the cold air already heralded winter. Yet, for Emily and David, every recess remained a refuge. Their maple tree, their bench, their shared laughter. But as the days passed, the stares became heavier. The whispers in the courtyard, the warnings from the parents, the awkward silences from the teachers, everything seemed to remind them that they had no right to be so close. One afternoon, as the sky grew cloudy, Emily ran to join David after class. Her face was tense. "David. Dad told me again yesterday that I should hang out with you less." David lowered his head. "Me too, Mom told me to be careful. Not because she doesn't like me being your friend, but because she says some people don't understand." They walked in silence, each weighed down by a weight too heavy for their childlike shoulders. Then David suddenly turned to her. "Come on. I want to show you something." He led her behind the school, to the edge of a small wood. There, hidden among the bare trees, was an old, dilapidated wooden cabin, the remnant of a former playground. The paint was peeling, the planks creaked, but to children, it looked like a secret castle. "Wow," Emily breathed. "This is my secret place," David said proudly. "When I want some peace and quiet, I come here." They climbed inside, laughing as they dodged the cobwebs. The cabin smelled of damp wood, but to them, it was a sanctuary. Sitting face to face, they remained silent for a moment. Then Emily whispered, "Do you think we're going to have to stop being friends?" David shook his head forcefully. "No. No one has the right to decide for us. But, what if our parents forbid us? Then we'll find a way. We can always meet here. No one will come." His eyes shone with a newfound determination. Emily looked at him, moved. She took out of her bag a small red string that she usually used to tie her pencils. "Then let's make a promise." David's eyes widened. "A promise?" "Yes. No matter what happens, no matter what others say, we remain friends. Always." She wrapped the string around their two little fingers and tied a clumsy knot. "That means the promise is sealed." David smiled, impressed by her seriousness. "Okay. Promise. Always friends." They stood looking at each other for a moment, aware that they had just created something stronger than words. A child's oath, but one that already carried the weight of destiny. As they left the cabin that day, Emily and David felt a new strength. As if this promise protected them from the outside world. They didn't know that the coming years would put that promise to the test. But deep down, they had already decided, no matter what, they would fight to stay together. And in the silence of the woods, the old cabin became the witness of an eternal pact. Time passed faster than they would have liked. The games under the maple tree, the shared snacks, and the laughter in the cabin became memories etched in their childhood minds. As the next school year approached, a new milestone was in order, the college. Emily and David were 9 years old when they received the news. It would no longer be the same school, nor the same teachers. The students of Lincoln Elementary would be divided between two different schools in the city, Roosevelt Middle School and Jefferson Middle School. One afternoon in June, as classes were winding down, Emily came running up to David, a crumpled letter in her hand. "Look, I got my college assignment." David took his out of his pocket. They compared the papers. Their faces froze. "Roosevelt," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Jefferson," David murmured, his gaze lost. Silence fell, heavy as a leaden blanket. We won't be in the same school," Emily said, tears in her eyes. "No," David replied, clutching his letter in his fist. "But it doesn't change anything. We made a promise, remember?" Emily nodded, but her childlike heart already knew it would be more difficult. Throughout the summer, they met as often as possible, at the cabin, in the park, or in front of the small neighborhood supermarket. But each encounter had a bitter taste. They knew the end was approaching. One evening, Emily confided her anxieties to her mother. "What if I lose my best friend, Mom?" Susan hugged her. "True friends stay in your heart, even if they are far away." At the Johnsons' house, David asked his father the same question. "What if Emily forgets me?" Michael placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "If she's really your friend, she won't forget you. But be prepared, son, things change when you grow up." September arrived. On the morning of the first day of middle school, Emily boarded her yellow bus, holding back tears. David boarded another, which took the opposite route. They looked at each other one last time from a distance, raising their hands in a fragile gesture. As Roosevelt Middle School, Emily found herself immersed in a new world. The hallways were wider, the students were older, the laughter was louder. She instinctively looked for David's familiar face, but he wasn't there. As Jefferson Middle School, David experienced the same disorientation. Unfamiliar faces surrounded him, the rules were different, and he suddenly felt alone, as if a part of him was missing. The first few months were difficult. Emily tried writing to David on small pieces of paper that she slipped into her pocket, hoping to run into him at the park. David, on the other hand, kept a secret notebook. Each day, he wrote down a memory he shared with Emily, as if to ensure that time wouldn't erase anything. But busy schedules, new friends, and distance took their toll. They saw each other less. Letters became rare. Promises to meet, tomorrow, turned into, some other day. And little by little, despite their oath, the separation began to create a void. Yet, deep down, both of them refused to admit that their story ended there. The cabin, the red string around their fingers, the memory of a shared apple, all of it remained etched in their memory. They were separated by the walls of the school, but their destiny continued to beat in unison, silently waiting for the moment to bring them together again. The middle school years passed like a long journey. Emily and David had taken different paths, constrained by schedules, new friends, and the inevitable distance that life sometimes imposes. But despite the distance, each kept the other in their memory, like a fragile light that no storm had completely extinguished. Then came the dreaded, but also awaited, moment, the high school in the small town of Springfield. All the students, whether they came from Roosevelt or Jefferson, ended up at the same school, Springfield High School. Emily, now a teenager, walked into the high school hall with a pounding heart. At 15, she had changed, her features had sharpened, her figure had become taller, and her gaze, once so childlike, now held a shyness mixed with maturity. But she had lost none of her inner sweetness. David, for his part, had also changed. Taller, more athletic, his boyish smile had given way to a newfound confidence. Football, which he played with passion, had given him self-confidence, but he remained the attentive and sincere boy, marked by the promises of his childhood. Their paths crossed the first week. In the crowded hallway, their eyes met. Emily felt her heart stop for a second. David, surprised, smiled. "Emily," he said hesitantly. "David," she replied, her voice trembling. An awkward silence fell. The years had changed them. They were no longer the kids at Lincoln Elementary, sharing apples and pencils. At lunchtime, David gathered his courage and joined Emily in the cafeteria. "It's been a long time," he said, sitting down next to her. "Yes, too long," she replied with a slight smile. They talked shyly. Emily talked about her reading, her interest in art, and her desire to one day attend university. David talked about his football team, his practices, and his dream of earning an athletic scholarship. But behind their words, an invisible distance persisted. Emily hesitated to laugh too much, for fear of appearing ridiculous. David, however, avoided talking about the years he had felt alone, as if the painful memories could erase the joy of this reunion. Around them, eyes were watching. David's friends, especially his teammates, looked at him curiously. "Who's the girl?" one of them whispered. "She looks stuck, doesn't she?" said another. On Emily's side, her classmates, who came from more conservative families, did not fail to notice her closeness to David. "Are you still talking to him?" a certain Jessica Miller, with a tone tinged with disdain. Emily didn't answer. Her heart sank, as it had years before, when someone had whispered to her that her friendship was weird. That same evening, lying in bed, Emily saw David's smile again. She wondered if their friendship could be reborn, or if the weight of the years had forever separated them. David, meanwhile, sat on the steps of his house, leafing through his old childhood notebook. Between the pages, he found a small red string, yellowed by time, carefully tied around two scribbled lines, "Still friends." He smiled wistfully. "You haven't forgotten, have you, Emily?" he whispered. The reunion was hesitant, full of doubts and shadows. But something deep inside told them that their story wasn't over. The invisible thread tied in a childhood hut continued to connect them, even if they did not yet dare to admit it. The first few months of high school had confirmed an undeniable truth: Emily and David couldn't ignore what was growing between them. It was no longer just a friendship. Every look, every gesture, every smile now contained something deeper. But with this new feeling came fear. Fear of others, of judgment, and especially fear of the adults who had already tried to control their childhood. One November afternoon, Emily and David found themselves outside the gym, away from the noisy hallways and prying eyes. Dead leaves swirled around them in a cold wind, and the streetlights were beginning to come on. David approached, hesitant. "Emily. I think I." Emily looked up at him. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked down, clenching his hands. "I think I love you, more than a friend." Emily felt her heart race. She wanted to laugh, cry, scream, but no sound came out. "David, me too. I think I love you," she whispered. For the first time in years, they sat side by side, their shoulders barely touching, but enough so that the world around them seemed to disappear. But fate was not kind. A few days later, Emily came home from school to find her mother sitting in the living room with a stern look on her face. "Emily," Susan Parker said slowly. "I've heard rumors." Emily felt her stomach clench. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Don't lie, Emily. I know you spend too much time with David." It's more than friendship," Emily whispered. Susan stood up abruptly. "Emily. You know exactly what that means. You can't, you mustn't." Across town, David was facing the same storm. His father, Michael, though more open, had heard echoes at school. "David, you don't want to rush things, do you?" he asked firmly but worriedly. "But Dad, I can't ignore it." I know, but there are people who won't understand." Emily and David now had to hide, exchange coded messages, and meet in safe places away from prying eyes. Fear, doubt, and the shame of their families weighed on them. Yet every moment they spent together reinforced what they felt. A simple caress of the hand, a smile exchanged, a tender gesture, everything took on an unbearable intensity. "Do you think we can ever be free?" Emily asked, sitting next to David on a park bench, her hands clasping his. "Yes. I believe so. We just have to be patient and strong." This chapter of their lives was a whirlwind of conflicting feelings, fear and desire, prohibition and promise, external pressure and the inner certainty that nothing could break this bond. And in this chaos, one truth stood out: their love was real, intense, and it already existed against the whole world. As autumn drew on, Springfield High echoed with the rumors, lingering stares, and whispers that youth loved to spread. For Emily and David, every day had become an exercise in caution. But the more the world told them no, the stronger their bond grew. One evening after school, Emily came home to find her parents sitting in the living room with serious faces. "Emily," her father began, his voice low but authoritative. "We know about David," added his mother. You don't understand," Emily whispered, her throat tight. "Oh, we understand perfectly," Richard cut in. "And that's exactly why you need to stop." Emily stood up, her eyes shining with tears. "No. I refuse to abandon him. David and we've been together since we were 8 years old." Susan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Emily, it's not easy." "It doesn't matter," cried Emily. "You can try to separate us, but my heart chooses David." For his part, David faced a similar conflict. His parents, although more tolerant, feared the gaze of the community. "David," Michael said one evening, "I know you care about Emily, but you have to be careful." "Dad, I'm ready to face whatever it takes. I'll never leave her." Angela, his mother, smiled with a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Then you know what you have to do," she said softly. David nodded, determined. His love for Emily was stronger than fear or judgment. A few days later, they found themselves in their secret cabin, which had become the sanctuary of their story. "We can't wait any longer," David said, taking her hands. "If we hide our love forever, we'll never live fully." "I'm ready," Emily replied, her eyes filled with determination. "No matter what they say. No matter who else says. We're staying together." They sealed this pact of adolescent love with a silent promise. No matter what happens, nothing and no one will separate them. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to continue despite it. Emily and David faced ridicule from classmates, reprimands from teachers, and family tensions. Every encounter, every moment spent together, became an act of bravery. But every smile, every tender gesture, was a reminder of why they fought. Their love, though difficult and often hidden, was now stronger than prejudice and obstacles. "We'll get there, Emily," David whispered, gently squeezing her hand. "Yes, together. Always together." And for the first time, they felt that their promise of a child was not just a memory, but the solid foundation of a love capable of defying the world. The years passed like a breeze. High school, college, small victories and defeats shaped Emily and David. But through all the storms, their childhood promise, the one made around the cabin, with a simple red string, had held. Emily grew into an ambitious young woman, pursuing studies in literature and art. Her sensitivity and creativity, nourished by her childhood and experiences, guided her toward a future she could never have imagined. David, meanwhile, pursued his passion for football while studying sports management. The years had made him more thoughtful, patient, and even more determined. The world around them had changed too, but some shadows of the past remained. The judgments, whispers, and barriers they had faced in Springfield had left scars, but also lessons, the strength to believe in themselves and in each other. One autumn morning, years after their separation and reunion, Emily found herself in front of Lincoln Elementary, hand in hand with David. The courtyard benches, the maple tree, and the old cabin were there, frozen in time. "Do you remember all that?" Emily asked, smiling, her eyes shining. "How can I forget?" David replied, gently squeezing her hand. "It all started here, and look at us now." They stopped in front of the dilapidated shack, a silent witness to their childhood promises and their adolescent struggles. Who would have thought that two kids, sitting under a tree, would change so many lives? Emily whispered. David smiled, his eyes moist. "And yet, fate has always bound us together." Their story hadn't been easy. There had been many judgments, trials, and prohibitions. But each obstacle they overcame had strengthened their bond. They finally understood that true strength lay not only in the love they had for each other, but in the courage to face the world together. They looked at each other, aware that everything they had experienced, since the first smile exchanged in the courtyard of Lincoln Elementary, had been the invisible thread that had led them there. "We did it," Emily whispered. "Yes, together," David replied. And in that simple gesture, a smile exchanged, a hand held, anything seemed possible. Their hearts, as children, adolescents, and adults, had never stopped beating in unison. Fate, patient and silent, had accomplished its work. The cabin remained there, a testament to the laughter of yesteryear and the promises made. The maple tree continued to grow, its leaves falling each autumn as if to remind us that, despite the passage of time, some things remain unchanged. Emily and David, hand in hand, knew that true love, the kind that endures through time and trials, had no color, no barriers, and no limits. It only needed courage, loyalty, and an open heart to survive. And they had all that.